Well, a pretty miserable day for the Cleveland Browns down at Huntington Bank Field after all the energy, all the excitement, all of the fresh air. It felt like this team breathed into the city a week ago with a great performance against the Baltimore Ravens. The air came out of the balloon extremely quickly here on Sunday afternoon. 27-10, the LA Chargers come to Cleveland and beat up the Cleveland Browns, and that last touchdown for Cleveland came well after the game was out of hand. Lots to unpack on a Browns season that seems to be, unfortunately, now going nowhere fast. It's our live reaction show, Cleveland Browns on SI. Hey, everybody, and welcome down to the stadium. I'm Brendan Gulick, sitting up in the press box up top. Spencer German's down on the field here. We just got out of post-game press conferences with Myles Garrett, Jameis Winston, Kevin Stefanski, who, almost always, all three of them go to the podium, and then players available in the locker room, kind of divide and conquer through that. And a day that, Browns fans are probably going home going, all right, well, what are we going to do the rest of the fall? Because, Spence, I don't really know how else to say it. Like, the theme of the day for me is just depressing. I thought the environment today was lackluster. The performance was atrocious. And it wasn't because the Browns were never competitive. They had a lot of really good plays along the way, but the big plays killed them. Let's lead off with this. I saw this stat as we were going down to the locker room. The LA Chargers had 343 yards of total offense. 7 plays accumulated for 221 of those 343 yards. That is brutal. And Cleveland never had a shot to win the game.
Yeah, and two of those, I think, I actually think like two of those kind of told the story of the game. The first one came on the Chargers' second drive. Defense had played really, really well on the first series and gets them off the field pretty quickly, 3 and out. And then the second drive, they had them backed up in 3rd and longs twice. One was, I think, 3rd and 17. And then an offsides penalty makes it 3rd and 12. They convert that one. And then that sets up a long 3rd down later on in the drive where the Chargers committed a penalty. They're backed up at it's 3rd and 20. And they just so happened to have Josh Palmer streaking on the sideline wide open with a wide open touchdown pass for 28 yards that helped to convert that one. So to your point on the defense, it was the offense and it was the defense. There was plays along the way where I thought this team played really, really well, and you saw some signs of that team from last week on both sides. But it was just they were shooting themselves in the foot. There was miscommunications. That was the first one. But the other big one came in the second quarter. That one was a 66-yard touchdown pass, so an even bigger play. And it was the same sort of thing. Same side of the field, Denzel Ward's side with Juan Thornhill. And I want to be clear, it's always hard to decipher who is to blame for those things in real time. I know it's easy to jump on Twitter and say, oh, it was Denzel's fault. Oh, it was this person's fault. Oh, it was that person's fault. I will say Denzel took the blame for those after the game because I think that's just him kind of being the player that he is and trying to sort of own it. But Juan Thornhill kind of walked it back and said it can't all just be on Denzel. And the common theme from the entire secondary, which we spoke to after the game, was just that those are miscommunication issues and they can't happen. And I think especially what's alarming, Brendan, is that was reminiscent of this defense, a couple years ago, pre-Jim Schwartz, when it was the Joe Woods defense. But this group now, this is a veteran group. They're better than those types of errors. And I understand it's hard out there, and I talked to some of the guys sort of off the record just about how they go about communicating things when it's loud and they can't hear everything, and maybe guys miss something. And a lot of it is just about hoping that they saw it and trying to communicate with hand signals. And sometimes those things get missed. It's unfortunate, but yeah, from a veteran group, you expected better today. And I do think those two plays basically changed the outcome of the result today.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like we've come to rely so heavily on this defense for being the backbone of the team. It feels like the offense has been problematic, but you'll stay in games because the defense plays well. And I don't know. I mean, for the first time all season, I really felt like the defense just that was bad. Now, I'm not saying the entire game, never had good plays. Myles Garrett had
6 sacks,
4-play sack, 4-play stretch, had 6 sacks as a defense in general. The Chargers are a decent team, but they're beatable. And you could tell in the way that Jameis and Miles and Kevin in particular answered questions, it really felt like they just beat themselves. And it's not to say that the Chargers didn't play well, but when you gift a team the yards and the points that the Browns gave the Chargers today, you're not going to win. It's just that simple.
I think that's a really good point. It's frustrating because like this team relies so much on that defense, and I think today, to your point, was a microcosm of like even they have flaws and even they're going to make mistakes, and maybe that's what the biggest problem with this team is. It's like those things become magnified to us because, and listen, like a blown coverage like that's always going to be noticeable, but they become magnified when they decide the game, especially so early on as it was, and the defense has to be perfect because we don't know what you're going to get from the offense. And I think that's what I'm trying to get out here is like that's got to be frustrating on some level that every week we hope the defense is going to stand on its head. And those guys will tell you, like, all these weeks where the offense struggled, those players all said, hey, offense only scores 10 points. We got to make sure we keep the other team from scoring more than that. Like they pride themselves on, we got to be the ones to sort of make the plays. But it just in reality, like in football, it's an imperfect game. Like you're going to make mistakes, things are going to happen, and so there's so much stress on that group specifically that in a game like this, where it feels like they didn't have their best effort, you put the loss on them. But it can equally be attributed to an offense that did absolutely nothing for most of this game, and by the time they did find the end zone, like you mentioned, it was already too late. Like that, so it was
27-3 at that point.
And that's been sort of the story of the season, right? Is the offense can find some sort of momentum late in games in garbage time when defenses kind of ease off. And I get the defense is not going to throw that side of the ball under the bus, but it's got to be frustrating and infuriating as a group when you feel like the defense most games, most weeks is giving you that effort to win, and it just doesn't translate into the victories on the record.
Pittsburgh's got a bye this week. Baltimore beat Denver 41-10. Lamar Jackson threw for 280 and 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. Cincinnati beat the Raiders 41-24. Joe Burrow threw for 251, 5 touchdowns and a pick. And so in some ways, the Browns losing today, I know we walked away from last week's win going, hey, like, it's nice to feel like you won a game and things maybe look like you're turning the corner a little bit. But at that point, at 2-6, you still felt like it was a long shot. Nobody's going to say it publicly, but 2-7 feels like the nail in the coffin. And Myles Garrett even alluded to it. He's like, listen, go handle what we're supposed to handle, go win 8 in a row, and go 10-7. You can probably still get in the playoffs, right? Stranger things have happened. That's how they have to approach it. Realistically, this team's not going to the postseason. And I think the part of this that just sucks is, through 9 games last year, the Browns were 6-3, and certainly were riding a little bit of a roller coaster, but we're in the middle of a stretch where they won 5 out of 6. And you were starting to find out, like, man, this team actually looks like we got some good things going here, despite all of the quarterback challenges that were thrown this way last year. And now, 1 year later, through 9 games, instead of being 6-3, you're 2-7. You're going into your bye, and the conversation in the middle of the game is about a report put out by Pro Football Talk that Zadarius Smith is going to be traded either by the end of the night tonight or by tomorrow. And you're sitting there and we're watching him play on the field and thinking to ourselves, like, maybe he had to know going into the game that, like, if the Browns were going to be sellers at the deadline, that he's probably a guy that could get moved. And nobody wants to be traded. Well, I shouldn't say nobody. Most players don't want out of the situation that they're currently in. If he goes to the Lions the way that report indicates, that might be a better thing for him anyways, because the Lions are a really good team. But I hate the idea that we're 365 days after looking at really good football and feeling like you got all this momentum and all these veteran players to play like that. Not even just to lose, but to play like that was just, it wasn't good enough. And as a fan, it leaves you pretty upset.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about the Zadarius thing here in a second and kind of what transpired after the game. But I will say, Brendan, like, to that point, I think that's what's so frustrating and disappointing about today. I mean, I wrote a couple pieces over on the site, si.com/NFL/Browns this week about guys kind of giving off this mentality that they thought, like, hey, if we get this one, all of a sudden it feels like the season can maybe mean something. And I wrote a column that went out this morning before the game about how, like you get to 3-6. Yeah, of course, it's still a long shot that you're going to make the playoffs. You got your work cut out for you, but you spend the next week while the team's on a bye. Fans, the players, maybe the team brass that has to make decisions here off of the deadline on Tuesday, you can talk yourself into maybe standing pat or more so pat and trying to sort of maybe thread the needle and make a couple trades, but still trying to stay competitive enough that, hey, if we make this magical run like we did last year with Joe Flacco, maybe we can play meaningful football in December, and at least we get to a point where, you're down the stretch of the season, you're showing up in the hunt graphic, right? Like that's what it felt like coming into today after the game last week. And then for them to just lay an egg the way they did, and the way they did really most of the previous 7 weeks, it was frustrating. Like I thought this team was going to come out with a different energy. I thought it was not going to be maybe a perfect performance like last week felt like, but that you'd at least see a team that was motivated, and it certainly just felt like the opposite today, which is why it's pretty frustrating. Now, on the Zadarius Smith front, just reading the tea leaves, man, like I think the reporting that's out there, as you mentioned from Mike Florio, feels pretty comfortably like that's going to be what transpires here. Zadarius was very, very quick about getting dressed, and there was a whole gaggle of media waiting to speak to him right at his locker, and he kind of walked right past him saying he didn't have anything to say, kept it moving. He dapped up a few teammates. Somebody said they kind of heard him physically say goodbye to Dwan Jones on his way out. So I thought that was kind of interesting. It feels like the tea leaves and just kind of reading the room in the locker room that they all kind of sense that he's likely played his last game for the Cleveland Browns.
I mean, that sucks. I think coming into the game, we kind of felt like if the Browns were going to sell, the two players that probably made most sense are him and Dalvin Tomlinson. And the thing about Tomlinson, as much as I love watching that guy play, the Browns have a little bit more depth at defensive tackle than they do at defensive end, right? I mean, you kind of felt like, if Zadarius Smith is healthy, like that dude he's a legit starter in this league.
I think we've seen that this year.
Yeah, and what a compliment to Myles Garrett to have him on the other side. I think it makes Smith that much more effective, even on a day today where Myles just does what he does and takes over games. The Browns are going to miss 99 on the field. Now, I have no idea what they're going to get back. I would imagine that the asking price should be pretty high, and I hope the Browns get a good return if, in fact, he is traded. But it just kind of begs the question of like, where do you go from here? Because, again, like Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski, they have to say the right things publicly, but even behind closed doors, they still have lots of division games in front of them. And the whole point after the Bengals loss was, hey, this thing's not over. We still got to play 5 more games in the North. And then they won against Baltimore. It's like, well, that's step one, right? If you go 5-1 in your division, you'll climb right back in it. You still have 4 games left in the North, playing Pittsburgh twice, Cincinnati and Baltimore once each. But like, you start to wonder, hey, with the lack of draft capital that this team has had over the last year, and with where payroll currently is and what they're going to have to do to restructure things, like, you have to put a really competitive product on the field. And they were banking on this season being a really good competitive team. And things flopped quickly when Deshaun played as poorly as he played. But I think the legitimate question is now, where do you go from here? And how do you convince Myles Garrett and Nick Chubb and Joel Bitonio and other veteran players, like, keep putting it on the line for us right now because we're trying to make something happen here. That's a tough thing to sell to somebody.
Yeah, and I think that's why this game, again, felt so disappointing, because the alternative to what I mentioned earlier was like, if you win, you can talk yourself into giving this a go, giving this a push after the bye week. If you lose, I do think it now opens them up to what you're alluding to, like you become sellers. And I want to be clear, people hear a team's going to be a seller, or there's been a lot of talk lately from fans like, oh, just start the fire sale, trade Myles Garrett, trade all these people. That doesn't happen in the NFL, guys. Like, it's not like the baseball trade deadline. It's not like the NBA. There's usually a little bit of movement. I could see the Browns maybe moving like 2 players at max, but you're not going to see them just like sell off their parts and just call guys up off the practice squad to play. Like that's just not how it works in the NFL. Za'Darius is clearly at the top of the list of guys that they've sort of been entertaining trading. So I think something maybe comes down with that. But yeah, like that's the difference between winning and losing this game, is that now, as you asked the question, where do they go from here? I think that, everything, not everything, but there are a number of things that should be on the table come Tuesday to get yourself better. I do think you sort of enter that draft pick accumulation mode where you're thinking about, okay, how can we position ourselves with a roster that we have? Because to your point, Brendan, like this team is very, very talented. And the idea is that a lot of these guys are still here next year. Your Denzel Wards, your Myles Garretts, etc. And like, as much as maybe some people feel like you just tear it down to the studs, you don't have to do that in the NFL. Like, you can get good quickly if you have the right person drafting the right players, and you build through the draft, and maybe you land on the right quarterback. I mean, look at Washington, right? Like, Washington was an embarrassment of an organization for so many years under Dan Snyder. They get a new owner, and now they've drafted the right quarterback, it seems, and that team's got a lot of excitement around it right now. They're the darlings of the NFL. So it doesn't have to be like the strip it down to the studs type thing. But I do think like this seventh loss, to your point, feels like the nail in the coffin for any sort of like late season push. Like, let's try to go for it. And it opens up the door to now realizing like, okay, we're sort of now turning our attention to how can we be the best team we can be for 2025.
I just can't help but like think about being in Houston in January and all the fun and all of the excitement around a playoff game. Think about the Jets game here shortly before they made the playoffs. And like, it just feels like we're light years from that. And it shouldn't feel that way because there's so many of the same guys on this team. But it has been a really, really disappointing season. And to think that we still have half of the season in front of us, I somewhere along the way, I and others will, I guess, snap out of it and be like, all right, time to just see what you got here. We talked about this just before we went on camera. Like, you got the bye. Do you entertain letting DTR play quarterback, assuming his hand or finger is fine? Do you entertain letting him play quarterback coming out of the bye? Because I think the point still stands. Like, Jameis isn't your future at quarterback. And I know Deshaun Watson will still technically be under contract when he theoretically heals from his Achilles injury. But you still got to know if DTR can handle regular season football. And so far, in a really small sample size, the answer to that question is no. But you have enough in front of you here where you wonder if, like, hey, maybe we need to give this kid more of a shot.
I think that's a very fair question. We talked about that even a couple of weeks ago after Deshaun got hurt. Do you just let this be sort of the DTR audition, if you will, for the rest of the year? I think that certainly comes back on the table now that you have a seventh loss. I also think, like, in relation to Jameis, if he's still here come Tuesday, which I'm imagining he will be, I think, if you were hoping to trade him, I think last week was your chance to do that because he played so well. I don't know that there's a team that's looking for him right now as a quarterback option, or that's desperate enough. But even in that regard, like, maybe the team uses the rest of the season, if they do decide to play Jameis, to evaluate whether or not he can be like a bridge option for you. So I think that could be in play too. But yeah, like the future of this team and kind of where they go from here, their decision-making process, it's funny, like it all does center around like that one position specifically, because it's about, are we trying to get ourselves in position to draft one of these rookies coming out and see if we can make that our franchise quarterback and sell that to the fans after the whole Deshaun Watson debacle? Or, are we viewing somebody who's with us right now as the guy next year and build around that guy to build a team that can be competitive next year with that person under center? So that's kind of, I think, at the center of all this. But they still have obviously 8 games to sort of map things out further. And it starts, I think, with Tuesday and the trade deadline and what this team looks like at 4:01 on Tuesday afternoon.
Just some final numbers for anybody that was interested that maybe didn't see him. Jameis Winston, 26 of 46 for 235. Obviously, the one late touchdown to Cedric Tillman and 3 interceptions. Nick Chubb ran the ball 15 times for 39 yards, no scores. Winston, 5 carries for 27 yards. Strong, 2 for 8 yards. Ford ran it twice for 5 yards. Tillman, 6 catches for 75. He was targeted 11 times. Jerry Jeudy, 7 catches for 73. He was also targeted 11 times. Akins had 3 catches for 32. Njoku, 5 for 29. And Moore had 3 catches for 28 yards. 3 catches. He was targeted 9 times total. Tough to get the ball to Moore today for some reason. The Browns
Certainly.
outpossessed the Chargers by 10 minutes in this game, which is also bad math. 8 minutes in this game, 34:09 to 25:51. Yeah, it's not good.
I think we got the full, like, it's funny. Jameis played so well last week, and we were all very excited. And there was these thoughts of, like, reflecting back to last year and, maybe he can channel some of that Joe Flacco magic. Today was like 1 week later, you got to experience the full Jameis Winston experience. It was a really good game where you're like, man, this guy could be a starting quarterback in the NFL. Look at him go. He threw 3 touchdowns. And then 1 week later, he throws 3 picks and it costs you. And it's funny because, like, last year with Flacco, like, he had some of those games where he threw a lot of picks, but the difference was he made enough of the big plays to sort of bail you out of those moments and still win you those games. And so, yeah, like, it wasn't meant to be today. It wasn't meant to be with Jameis, maybe, but yeah, just frustrating all around in a game that it felt like you said at the top of the show. This Chargers team is good, but I don't know that I thought they were, like, unbeatable or that they were going to put up 27 points on you. Yeah, I thought it was going to be more of a grinded game and it would be close, and maybe Jameis can win it for you at the end.
I mean, Spence, the Browns ran 20 more plays than the Chargers did. 76 plays in the game for 292 yards.
That's insane.
The Chargers, 56 plays for 342. And again, I said it off the top, 342 yards of offense for the Chargers, but 221 of those came on 7 chunk plays. Obviously, the biggest was the 66-yard touchdown pass. The Browns, by the way, had 1 play today over 20 yards, and it was a 21-yard play on the pass to Akins. So, story of the game was one team gave up big plays that cost them. And when the Browns tried to fight back, they turned it over, ultimately. And then in one of the least understandable things I've seen in a long time, Dustin Hopkins appeared to chunk a kick. I can't confirm that. I don't know if anybody talked to him, but I watched the replay of it several times. At first, I thought he slipped because the aftermath of his missed field goal, definitely, like, his body went down. So I figured, okay, he slipped. But then I watched his plant, and I'm like, well, his plant foot kind of, like, bent funny, kind of rolled. So maybe that was it. But I'm like pretty sure he kicked the ground like 2 inches behind the ball.
Did he fix his divot, I wonder?
Yeah, can we take a mulligan? Like, come on. Yeah, just, yeah.
I felt like, too, like, that play felt like a microcosm of the day as a whole. It was just like, dude,
it did.
Nothing was going right. You can't even get, like, your kicker's now chunking his field goal kicks that just go directly into the back of his offensive lineman. Like, it was just weird. And I honestly wish we didn't get, I don't know if Dustin Hopkins talked to anybody in the locker room. I didn't see if people sort of gathered around him. I kind of wish we would have, so we could have asked him if that's what actually happened on the play, but maybe we'll follow up with him in a couple of weeks here.
Yeah. Hey, Dustin, remember that kick you had 2 weeks ago? Did you chunk that? Yeah.
I can
really
relate.
good for a
Anytime
kicker.
I'm on the golf course, I do the same thing. So I feel your pain there, Dustin.
Oh, my God. Yeah, no kidding. Well, I don't really know what else to say other than that was just it was a bad day. And hopefully the Browns can figure it out because they still have half the season in front of them. You're being paid to play and you need to go out and compete really hard. There are winnable games on the schedule the rest of the way, but they're winnable if you stop shooting yourselves in the foot. That's not to say the Browns are going to go 8-0 the rest of the way, but they are better than some of the teams left on their schedule if they can actually go out and execute the way they did last week. Baltimore is probably a top 5 team in the league, and they pounded the Ravens last week. They are capable of playing well, but today was it was horrendous. It was really, really bad.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And I think we've been asking a lot this year the question of, like, where do they go from here? I think now more than ever is kind of the crossroads of the season with that trade deadline coming up on Tuesday. There's bound to be some moves made. We'll see what this team looks like again at 4:01 on 4:01 p.m. on Tuesday. And then, we're supposed to hear from Andrew Berry this week, so we'll see kind of where his head's at with things. I know he doesn't really give a lot, much like Kevin Stefanski, but just kind of see what goes into where the team's mindset is from somebody who's obviously high up in the organization, as they kind of navigate that home stretch of the schedule that we were hoping was going to mean a little bit more with a win today, but it just wasn't in the cards.
All right. Plenty more coverage for you from today's game on si.com/NFL/Browns. Hope you'll subscribe to our YouTube channel. We do lots of video just like this. It's Cleveland Browns on SI. You can find us there. Certainly find us on social media as well. Our Twitter handle is at CLE Browns on SI. For Spencer German, I'm Brendan Gulick. Enjoy the bye week. Maybe we'll get some good weather along the way. You can sneak out and play some fall golf or something. And we'll see if this team has any big news coming up on Tuesday at the deadline. But again, for all the latest, we've got you covered. Cleveland Browns on SI. Final score today, Chargers 27, Browns 10.